Eve. Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, back from our Thanksgiving break, I have a very exciting guest today. I'm here with Shanell Tyus, and she is I always have to look, I always click
I
through to
know.
your page,
It's a
the
mouthful.
director. And I want to talk about that too, but because it was
It was
purposeful.
intentional,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, you are our director of
Equity.
Equity, Inclusion, and Learning here at Sway Group. And you joined the company in June, and that's why we are talking now, because December is 6 months after June. And I think a lot of agencies and brands, most of them added directors of diversity and inclusion, I think was the big thing. But a
Yeah.
lot of brands added this role, whatever it's called, to their org chart back in June. And so we thought it was really important to touch base 6 months in and talk about what we have done, what we continue to do, how we're making sure that this wasn't just a flash in the pan and that we're walking our talk. And I'm really proud of what we've done, and I absolutely love everything that you brought to us. So I kind of selfishly wanted to show off and share you with the world. So that's what this is. But maybe start, I guess, two things, and I'll shut up and let you talk. But one, just a little bit about your background and why you were great. I mean, we've worked with you for years and years. You used to be a speaker at our conferences and have helped us with writing. But other than us knowing you and loving you personally, what your background is and what makes you so great for this role. And then I think it's really, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on that intentional title and why equity, inclusion, and learning is felt more appropriate than diversity and inclusion, which we see so much of.
For sure. So as for my background, it's kind of been a windy road. My undergrad is in child and adolescent development and psych, and my master's is in counseling, higher ed, student affairs. So it was in that higher education work, basically student affairs degrees prepare you for everything outside of the classroom. So that student life perspective, which you have a daughter who's a college freshman, so you know she's experiencing so many things for the absolute first time, including living in a completely different culture than what she knows. So my first job it was in student housing in residential life. So Cal State Northridge it's the most diverse of all 23 CSUs. 40,000 students, about 4,000 of them living on. So if you imagine this sort of like desirable location of Northridge because of its proximity to the beach and to the mountains and to everything, we just get a flood. Not to mention there's some really stellar programs, one of which is a National Center on Deafness. So it's one of two in the country. So it's a literal melting pot. So to work in our residential life area, we had to just be equipped to be able to help these 4,000 students who have never lived with people different from themselves and their family to build a community. You don't have to get along, you don't have to love each other, but you're living in a community, and that comes with understanding your biases, your privileges, and everything. So I was indoctrinated into a very submersive oppression reduction training as a staff member, working out my own biases and crap, recognizing the areas where I've been privileged and where I lack privilege, and then having to teach that to a staff of about 100 for several years. So my background starts, in having to learn how to work with college students, but also having to unpack my own biases in order to work with people to do that effectively. And from there, my social justice education lens and focus was just laced in everything that I did, whether it was on the college campus or with companies and organizations that I worked for. So you add to that I have moonlit as a copywriter, and I'm a trainer and a coach and a developer. My role with Sway is lending into the title. It's this perfect blend of really my passions. One, being a social justice educator and not being afraid to take that into any space that I enter, whether it's uncomfortable conversations I've had to have at the gym with gym buddies and trainers around oppressive language and being very careful with pejoratives and oppressive speech just because it's a part of the culture. Or in my classroom where I teach right now, I teach at our local university, our local Cal State here where I live in Central California. And I teach child and adolescent family studies, but every single lecture is an oppression reduction lecture because you can't understand how children develop and then try to properly equip them for their futures without wanting to mitigate some of the lenses that you, with which you view people, cultures, children, people different from yourself. So the title at Sway is intentional because we wanted to make sure that we weren't just tossing terms around, right? You see a lot of training, diversity, and inclusion. And I think diversity is sort of the bottom, step, right? Yeah. And I think we've identified that we need to, at Sway Group, be a diverse staff. We have certain dimensions of diversity hit, right? We are an all-woman company for the most part, right? And so that basis, we think we covered in terms of, okay, all women, who are the women? So we've already recognized that. So I think we're at the point of creating a title. We knew that we needed to go a step beyond diversity. It's more about what are we doing once we're diversified, right? So making a diverse staff is one thing, but do they feel that they're included, that they're heard, that they're seen, that they're valued, and that they're a part? And that's really where the inclusion comes in. Where the equity piece comes in is, again, within the company, are we creating organizational structures that allow for upward promotion and mobility? And do those things take into account background, qualifications, and are we promoting diverse staff? That's one piece of it. But also, as a marketing firm, we have such power to position people, their voices, and their platforms using our own. So how intentional are we with regard to not just presenting a deck of influencers that contains diversity, which has always been our focus, right? We've always been committed to making sure that you consider that there are different people than what you ideally envision to represent your brand, right? These people are living these same lives, just in different color skin. But in addition to that, it's, okay, we know that that's a thing that we do internally, but equity is not about equality. It's not about saying, well, everyone has the same shot, right? Equitability is recognizing that not everyone has the same shot and doing what you can to fill in those gaps intentionally. So we are saying there are however many people, right, vying for these campaigns nationwide, globally, right? With that, we are kind of conditioned because of systemic oppression to look for a very specific being, type, look, lifestyle, background to fill this image. We're saying we are going to kind of dismantle that structure in terms of how we put people forward, how we encourage brands to be represented by saying, this is really what you need to consider if you want to work with Sway Group. And then two, what you can expect from us in working with Sway Group. You're going to get a push, and I think push sounds maybe elementary, but in some cases it really does have to be a push or a nudge.
We go through it all the time. So we'll have we've always, as you said, it's always been important to us to make sure that the influencers presented and put onto a campaign represent a diversity of everything, of body types, of skin color, of sexual orientation, of all of it.
Yeah.
Even when clients weren't asking, the nice thing since June is they're starting to ask for it. To your point, like they'll ask for it, but then layer on all these other demands that make it really difficult to do it. So, okay, we want both Spanish speaking and English speaking. We want diversity of race, but we want this engagement rate. We want their their home decor to be just white and gray with no color in it. We want them, we want them to look aspirational, which I feel like is kind of a dog whistle. So it's there is a push or a nudge, if I want to sound like my grandma Lily, like you do have to kind of redirect and educate and say, okay, we're hearing you and we agree that this campaign does need to be diverse. Let's talk about some of these other requirements and how they're going to hamper or hinder us doing that, and maybe dial some of them back, because what's most important is that we have this diversity of voices and life experiences showing the product.
And you hit the nail on the head with the push is really about education, because it's not just have different people and different body sizes, right? It's here's why this is important. You really have to, and Sway Group, I think, has done this beautifully, position yourselves as not just experts, but educators. What are you doing with that knowledge? Okay, so you hired someone, you have amazing things happening internally, and you've got a secret sauce, and you've had it for what? How many years is this?
9.5.
9.5 years. So it's this, you're not a novice at this, but because of that, you bear the responsibility of being educators. Here's why this is important. Here's what this means. So with respect to my title, I think the learning piece is in there again intentionally, because there's work to do. There's literal education work to do. And not just externally, right? We are a group of diverse women. Some of us come from very, rural backgrounds, homogenous backgrounds. I think when you talk learning, we've got so much to learn about not just the world and how it works as a community, using that term again, but the part, it's very much like my role in housing. What role do you play in the community, right? So as I'm teaching my students to go be future educators, it's understanding this is what you see when you see a little Black boy, right? We are groomed societally to one day view them as threatening and menaces and thugs in the ways that we define them. And that starts at 3 years old. That starts at 2 years old. Preschools, this is me getting off on a tangent, but it's so relatable. Preschools like Head Start, and federally funded preschools, but preschools in general are expelling students at a rate higher than all of K through 12 education combined. They just don't have to deal with it, especially the ones that are federally funded. So when you think about the demographic of the students who are getting expelled, African-American boys are leading that number. So this thing that we think we see, like when we get down to George Floyd, does not start with mid 40s and 50s. This is how they're viewing my son, my little baby, right? So if as educators in training, they're not learning, you've got smudges on your glass in terms of how you look at the world. Those smudges are they're not inherently problematic because you have them. They're problematic if you and you never see them, or you see them and you ignore them, viewing the world through those smudges. So for us in Sway Group, the learning piece is really about, okay, sure, we can do all of these things externally with our influencers, with our brands, with our community, but what are we doing internally to approach the work differently? And so my role has this beautiful blend of not just training and development to the degree of how we perform in our roles, but really the internal work that it's going to take for us to be major educators, right? Dismantlers of oppression, by understanding first the ways that we are oppressed and the ways we oppress others. So that's really at the helm of a lot of.
So I want to talk about. So I'm going to gloss over some really important things, because there's two things I really want to talk about, but I want to make sure I at least mention the things I'm glossing over. So you helped us with some of like the meat and bones that we had to have. So we put out a statement in June, which you helped us with. We added a whole page about our diversity policy and what we're doing. We updated our mission statement and our values. We created a diversity policy that you worked with us on. So that's just some of the almost like logistical cogs in the wheel, the things that we had to do. But what I'd love to talk with you about are two things that I think are kind of, I've just been particularly proud of that we're doing and just love that you brought to us. One of which felt very as soon as we did it, I'm like, oh my God, this makes sense. Of course we're doing it. And the other one, I didn't at first get how it all tied in, but now I'm like, oh, she's so smart. So I want you to talk about that one too.
Okay.
So the first one, the one that made a ton of sense and we continue to do is our quarterly training. So tomorrow and Thursday, because everyone has Zoom fatigue, we break this full day training up into 2 days. And so tomorrow and Wednesday will be our second quarterly training. And so I want you to talk about that because it's brilliant and smart and we had to do it. The other thing that you brought, that the one that didn't it took me a minute to get it, is we have an internal newsletter now that we send out that really, you can talk about it, but it just humanizes everyone and brings us closer together. And it's kind of crazy that this super fun 80s themed retro PDF can have so much power. But I think it's very meaningful to everyone who works. We've gotten such great feedback, and I think it's the highlight of the first week of every month. So I'd love you to kind of talk more about those two.
Sure. So the training, I think that was one of the first things we knew. We need to know what we don't know, right? And we need to get better and go deeper at the things that we're at least aware of. So our trainings are focused twofold. One, of course, is oppression reduction and social justice. And that is beyond diversity and inclusion for some intentional ways. It's understanding the differences in those terms. Oppression is a cycle and it affects us all, whether we're targets or agents, meaning whether we are holders of the power or the recipients of the use of that power. So we've got that in general. I have privilege because I'm master's level educated from a mom who didn't finish college, and I am lacking privilege, meaning I am a target because I am a woman, I'm a Black woman, right? So we've got it all, and we need to understand that and stop ascribing privilege to other people without checking our own. So our training focus on oppression reduction helps with that greatly, I think, to just break down the terms in a place that is safe, that's open, that's supportive, non-judgmental, non-combative, and that doesn't mean emotions, feelings, safe disclosures, and vulnerability. But if you can't have those conversations in intentionally designed spaces, we're never going to move the trajectory as a society. So I think we've done a really of creating a space that says, come in, be vulnerable, be willing to be uncomfortable and challenge yourself, be safe and treat this as a safe space. But there's also going to be some bravery and vulnerability required. So that's one of the parts of our training. The other piece is focused on our work in Clifton Strengths. So Strengths Finder assessment to understand what we inherently and naturally bring. And I think that's just a morale booster, period. When you have a different set of language to describe yourself and understand yourself and help other people see the very best of you versus what we're conditioned to do societally, which is weakness fixing and focusing on the areas where we lack performance. So that is, and then it's fun. I think
I love it.
Hours on Zoom went surprisingly fast for all of us by breaking it up, which is smart. But infusing in opportunities to authentically connect, share, be vulnerable, and be challenged. Like what you said is dripping in your privilege, or what you said. Do you see how what you said is what you're scared of is literally how I've lived my entire life? And so you get a glimpse of how that feels. We need those aha moments. And we get to have them over Zoom, which is how we do everything in the world right now. The other piece of the newsletter, I think for me, it was really important because my role is I'm not touching sales. I'm not touching marketing. There's so many pieces of the company that I don't touch, rightly so, that I think we needed to not treat these quarterly trainings as just, these sort of landmarks that get us from one quarter to the next. The newsletter is comprised of, like you said, these highlighting of our staff, so getting to know each other, because the departments in any organization can be siloed. You work with your team on the most day-to-day work, but it kind of bridges the gaps so we understand and know each other a little bit better with like a monthly highlight of a couple folks. It is fun and 80s themed because that just, no one hates that. No one hates the 80s. And then the more tangible pieces about what you should be reading, what you could be learning, what you could be listening to, what it means, who you maybe want to follow if you're more interested in this. We get to share awards, so milestones that are achieved in the company, and the feedback that comes from folks is positive, but it's also constructive. Like, it was at the suggestion of a team member to say, like, can we make sure we're highlighting when people have birthdays and anniversaries, and those things are, we should be including those in the newsletter. So I think having the team see it as something that really does connect us and educate us has been awesome. And we want to get more intentional with it. So what can we be doing to make sure we're following up on the resources that we put in for managers to better lead and connect with their teams, or finding out, did you follow any of these people and have you learned anything? Did you research what's going on in Armenia, or have you looked into any of these pieces that are being shared? There's so much potential with a newsletter, I think, and you don't want it to overwhelm folks, but you do want it to be intentional. So I'm glad you're liking it. I'm glad you see.
I mean, some of it is selfish because I had a goal. I mean, all my 2020 goals are kind of in the crapper, but one of them was to be the leader I want to be. And for me, like, a big defining factor of that was communicating more with the whole team. And I love sending out a monthly email that talks about how the past month went and what we're struggling with, what went awesomely well, what we're trying to accomplish now, like just kind of where we're at, and because I can't connect with everyone one-on-one all the time. And then the other piece of it was we have these 5 company values, and so I think we're going to be doing them quarterly because we're not a 1,000-person company, so it's getting a little repetitive. But we like to give quarterly awards for people who best represent that value, or for whom, like, their colleagues feel like they've done something that really just, like, so one of our values is being agile, and everyone nominates. It's like, again, one of the best parts of the beginning of every month is reading the nominations that come through, and people nominating their team members for, how they best represented agility or diversity or bringing their whole selves to work. Just awesome things. So anyway, that's my selfish reason for loving the newsletter, is sometimes I get so busy that I don't send out the email. But when I have you sending me reminders that the newsletter has to go out, because now that email is the top part of the newsletter, and the value awards are part of the newsletter. So it keeps me accountable to my
and I think it's goal. To your point of wanting to connect with each team member, they want to connect with you 3. So that first opening part being from the partners, I think, is so powerful, to really have it from your mouths to our ears to say, like, here's what's going on, here's what we see, here's what we know, here's what we recognize. And not that, and like you said, it's not a 1,000-person company. So you 3 are always in reach, you, Tiffany, and Fran, but it puts you in reach, I think, in a different way. That's tangible and experiential. I love reading that first part, because it's always, for me, it's the one part I don't to read it and the value of the word. So I'm like, oh, I love it.
Well, this was so great, and I'm so I'm proud of what we've done. I'm proud of what you've brought to us, and it's just nice to be able to share you with the world. And I hope people will add some comments. And if you guys have any questions for Shanell, I think all companies should be doing what we've done and what Chanel's helped us to do. So I love sharing this stuff.
Thanks to your leadership. I mean, not every leadership trickles down. So it takes leadership wanting to invest and wanting to be uncomfortable and wedge this into the agenda, right? Because everybody's got their agenda, and some places this just doesn't fit in it, unfortunately. So props to you and Tiffany and Fran for making it a priority.
Well, it is, and we're going to keep yelling about it and hopefully get some others on board.
People will hear.
Yeah.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye.